We are just about finished, not completely, but we are, this may be the last of sermon for a while. We may be suspending some of our teaching in the Jewish Apologetics series, which many of you are aware of. Of course, you've been here for a while. You know that we've been teaching these how to answer Jewish objections to our faith. Taken a lot of them taken from the series of books published by Michael Brown a number of years ago. He actually started writing, and he wrote the initial volume back in 1998, I think, after quite a bit of research, and he thought he'd have at least 2 volumes. He ended up with 5, and I think he could have gone on. But we've done a series of sermons, as you can see. We've actually completed 30 so far. They're all on our website, and today we will be looking at one more. What I call our Jewish objection to Yeshua. Why some Jewish people say they cannot believe in Yeshua. They have reasons. They give reasons. And Dr. Brown has listed 154 of those reasons. So far we've done sermons. This will be number 31. And this one has multiple parts. It begins with a statement by the, let us say, the Jewish, what I call pre-believer. I'm optimistic that they will come to faith at some point. So I think of them as I look back in my own history. There was a time before I was a believer. And yet I was actually 30 years old before I came to faith. So if you would have known me when I was in my 20s, you might have rightly called me a pre-believer. I didn't know that was going to happen, but God did. Anyway, pre-believers might be saying some of these things, and you might be hearing them if you have opportunity to be around a Jewish group, and there are many opportunities here in Orange County from time to time. A lot of them are included in our bulletin to make you aware of events, and I think there are several coming up right now, of course, in this season. And so the complaint actually has 3 parts here. It says, Judaism is a healthy religion. Imagine I'm a Jewish pre-believer talking to you as a believer. And I'm talking to you and I'm telling you, Judaism is a healthy religion. You see, Judaism doesn't see the world as intrinsically evil. It doesn't denounce marriage or call for self-renunciation. Christians, on the other hand, you folks, see the world as evil. You advocate for celibacy. And you even say, as John had actually listed it a moment ago, deny yourself, take up your cross, and suffer. Judaism doesn't say that. So we're different. How can I feel comfortable in considering your faith if my faith as a Jewish pre-believer takes these positions? Well, so how would you try to convince me that I have the wrong perspective on your faith? Or that perhaps these are correct perspectives and mine is wrong? How would you do that? Let me summarize those 3 so we can talk about them this morning. I'm going to summarize the little longer text by simply listing 3 essential complaints about that were just on the screen a moment ago. And then I'm going to summarize them this way. Jewish pre-believers would say that they don't believe the world is hopelessly evil. That's a very negative thought. They don't believe that. They don't believe that celibacy, not getting married, is necessary for religious leaders. They don't believe that. And thirdly, they certainly don't believe you must suffer for your faith. That is a hard one for them to accept. Why should you have to suffer for your faith? Isn't faith supposed to be a blessing from God? Isn't it current? And when you have a relationship with God, aren't you supposed to be blessed by doing that? Why should suffering be required? Well, I'm going to start this morning by, let me just add this. The implications of these statements is that Christians do believe these things. Did you know you believe all these? Right? Well, do you believe them? Huh. Interesting question. I don't want to see any hands up. I want to think for a minute. Do you believe each one of those? I see heads shaking one way and then another. I see. So we have some few things to talk about this morning here. And I want you to think these through. I'm going to start, of the three, I'm going to look at all three, and I'm going to start right in the middle with that one. But the engineer in me comes out. It doesn't always slide out, but this morning it'll come out for this one. Celibacy is, Jews believe that the celibacy is necessary for religious leaders. They don't believe that. Do you believe that? Wow. Let's look at that. I'm going to call this and head this section, number 2. We're jumping in the middle. That Jews don't believe it. But you know, I hope you do know, that in for Catholic priests today, celibacy is mostly required. They have made some exceptions. People who enter the priesthood who are already married, who convert from another denomination and come into the Catholic faith and want to be, take the priesthood on, and they have to appeal for an exemption, and they get it sometimes. And so it isn't entirely 100%, but most priests today, Catholic priests, would tell you that they are married to the Lord, to their faith, and they are not going to marry a woman or a man. And I went and I looked up some statistics on this to see how common this is. This is where I love numbers, right? So the total number of Christians in the world today, now this might really surprise you. If you had a guess, how many would you guess? Well, it's on the screen, kind of giveaway. 2.2 billion Christians who self-identify as Christians, okay? These are people who may or may not be, right? I mean, you and I can argue whether somebody is or is not, but they call themselves Christians. So that's 2.2 times 10 to the 9th. The total number of Christians just in the United States, and I'm going to focus on the United States because that's the area that we live in for the most part. We could take Orange County, and could take even some smaller areas, but I'm going to say the United States because at least it's a place that we travel around and we speak the language, kind of. Unless you're in the Deep South and you try that. But the number of Christians in the United States today is approximately 230 million. That's a pretty big fraction of the country. The total number of priests in the United States today, I spelled it wrong. That was I just got the D and the A backwards. The total number of priests in the U.S. today, about 400,000. Now, if I take the fraction of the number of priests divided by the total number of Christians, see, I want to see how significant that is. How big a part of our believing community, the Christian community, believers, okay, however you want to identify yourself, how many are priests? Only 0.2%, roughly. And this is the number who believe in celibacy. 0.2% of the Christians. That means that 99.8% of the believers today are not even thinking about celibacy. So I submit to you that being accused of believing in celibacy, if somebody, a Jewish person comes to you and says, "But you guys believe in that?" The answer is, no, we don't. Most of them, 99.8% don't participate in that. So I think we can ignore this one completely. I'm just going to take number 2 out of the discussion. Celibacy is really not one of our problems or one of our disagreements between a Jewish pre-believer and us. Therefore, I'm going to suggest that what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to present the basic truth of what I'm about to tell you in the remaining message this morning. And that central truth is this one. Because this world is hopelessly evil, godly people will indeed suffer for their faith. And I'm going to try to prove that to you this morning. If you are a believer, sooner or later, in some ways, some more than others, you will suffer for your faith. Let me begin with this number 1 question then, that where the Jewish people will say they don't believe that the world is hopelessly evil. I say that believers do. See, many in the Jewish community, if you have a relationship with Jewish friends and family, or perhaps, many in the Jewish community will say, "Hey, you know what? We are here to work together to make this world a sacred and holy place. And we can do it." Good luck on that, is what I say. I think that is wishful thinking. I know they like to think that. I have Jewish friends who have said that to me. And I always think to myself, yeah, how's that working out? According to the Bible, if you just think back just a little bit, I always like to go back to that Bible thing, you know. I think when I find myself wanting to argue anything doctrinally or religiously, I find myself going back to that book. And I don't know about you, but I thank God for that book, because I constantly have to go back and reread it. Did it say that? Did I get that right? Yeah. And I do. Oh, yeah, okay. According to the Bible, it may have started out as a wonderful creation, a holy and sacred place. But as you recall, we all know, the very first man that God created, Adam, immediately sinned, well, pretty quickly. And he passed on, his nature changed because of that. Something that became, from one of his actions, it actually changed his nature. The scripture teaches that. And the nature that he now possessed as a result of that sin was a sinful nature. We call it that. And that has since been passed on to all humanity. So whether you wanted it or not, sorry to report, you're born with a sinful nature. Oh, John's leaving on that. See? He doesn't want to hear that. No, he'll be back. We love him. Yeah. But not only did that happen, did Adam sin, as you well know, his very first son, Cain, he wasn't such a good guy either. He killed his, we won't get into the details there, ended up killing his brother Abel, and that was his only brother at the time. Maybe like sisters instead. It didn't work out so well between. So just look, I mean, we start with one person sinning, and immediately the descendant is killing, and so it begins. This is our beginning. This is where we came from. We have to face this. You know, man's inhumanity to man, I was thinking about bringing examples of this, but I thought, we're going to get too far. Man's inhumanity to man has only increased in its lethality since the beginning of time. You see, there have been deadlier and deadlier weapons that have increased dramatically over the centuries. We all know that as well. Did you know that the 20th century, the one we last completed, was the deadliest century in recorded human history? More people were killed, not just died, but were killed in the 20th century than all previous centuries put together. That's not a good trend. We're in the 21st. I want to share with you a few comments that I found in a news organization that published some comments called, the news organization, it's called The Telegraph. It listed some things that have happened fairly recently, very recently. In 2014, that's pretty recent, 180,000 people were killed in internal conflicts. And that number was 3.5 times higher than 4 years earlier. Look at that trend. Deaths from terrorism have risen 5-fold over the years, the past 15 years, actually, and this is published in 2015. The deaths from terrorism have risen 5-fold in this century, killing more than 32,000 people in the year 2014 alone, just from terrorism. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that as of 2015, almost 60 million people are now, as of 2015, and it's grown since then, are now either refugees or internally displaced within their own countries because of conflict and violence. This is the highest it's been since the Second World War, and it equates to almost 1% of the world's current population. They're out of their homes and possibly out of their countries. The latest figures for deaths by homicide are at almost 1 million a year. Violent demonstrations throughout our societies are more prominent, and I don't know about you, but I certainly agree with this. Perceptions of criminality around us are rising. So it's pretty bad from what we see. But I always want to go back to that book again. How does God see it? What does the Scriptures say about this world? A familiar passage, perhaps, hopefully. 1 John chapter 2, beginning at verse 15. John wrote to the believing community, "Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." Why? "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but it is from the world." See, the world is passing away, and also with it, its lusts. But the one who does the will of God lives forever. John clearly encourages believers not to love this world. All right? Why? Why not love this world? Are there not times where you see a sunset, you see a beautiful sky or some beautiful mountains or some of God's creation, a lake and so on, and the waves of the ocean? Do you not see those and marvel and say, wow, what a beautiful world? we live in. I love it. Why not love it? You see, most things in this now, what I call now fallen world, because it is fallen. It isn't the way God intended it for it to be, because we're in it. Most things in this now fallen world work against us. They work to pull you and me away from a growing relationship with God. Now, you may look at a beautiful sunset or beautiful mountains and be drawn to God. But when John, who writes this, is talking about loving the world, he's talking about the things in the world, not the world itself, not the creation. And those things that mankind has created, a lot of them pull you away from your relationship with God, whether you realize it or not. Think about how you spend your time. Do you have one of these? Smartphone? Or a big one? A tablet? I'll be generic. Or a computer? I mean, how can you not have one these days, right? You're so out of touch if you don't have that. They're nice and handy to do some things, but boy, will they consume hours and hours and hours of your time and your focus. They will take you away from reading your scripture. Probably. So let me ask you this. Which is more important to you? Now think about these carefully before you just, kind of decide. Which is more important to you? The things you desire in the flesh, the lust of the flesh, and as John says, the things you see around that others have, perhaps the lust of the eyes, or this boastful pride of life. Look at me, aren't I great? You should be honoring me for who I am or what I've accomplished. Any of those three appeal to you? They really are tempting you. Or is this something that you really are looking forward to hearing? Words that from the Lord that say, "Depart from me, you practicer of iniquity. I never knew you." A lot of people, when they read this text, they overlook the fact, the word never that's in there. It's not like God changed his mind about you. He says, you're out of my presence. Why? Because I never knew you. It's not that you broke your relationship with me. You sinned and now you're no longer part of my kingdom. He said, you were never part of my kingdom. You might have thought you were, but I know you weren't. That's a scary thought. You want to hear any of those words? Or would you rather hear this one? Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. You see, there's a relationship that has to be there between you and God to hear those words. And in this life, you get to choose whether you want that relationship or not. I conclude there is no way around the fact that the world that's pulling you away from God is not something that you can fix. Not on a grand scale. We can't get together and fix it. I wish we could. The world is hopelessly evil. Does that mean you can't do anything in this world that's good? No, that doesn't mean that at all. A lot of you give a lot of yourselves to good works, which is what you're called to do. But the world still is evil around you. Number 3, Jews don't believe that you must suffer for your faith. You know what? The Hebrew Bible, I wish they would read that and be a little more familiar with that. The Hebrew Bible is filled with examples of people and situations, mankind that has suffered in life. Here are just a few off the top of my head. How about Joseph? How about Moses? Boy, that poor guy in the desert, 40 years. How about Naomi? The book of Ruth. How about Job? You want a classic, someone who suffered? Who had no idea why he was suffering for a long time. How about David? King David, who became a king, chased by Saul, went through disasters. And how about Jeremiah, just to name a few well-known men of God, and women of God too, who suffered. They suffered miserably in life. You think you've got it bad? If you read about Jeremiah, it'll make you feel better. You see what he went through. Even the entire nation of Israel suffered because, well, they refused to obey God. That's the thought, isn't it? See, they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. I don't think that was a lot of fun. I've thought about that, and I can see why some of them were saying, let's go back to Egypt. It was easier there. Because this wilderness thing is not a lot of fun. There were direct judgments that were brought against them, even in the wilderness. It wasn't bad enough being there, but God, all the things you read about in the text from Exodus on, oh my gosh, the things they went through till they finally got there. And then, of course, they themselves didn't get there, only their descendants did. They were attacked by neighboring peoples. God allowed that to happen. In fact, you might say he used them to judge Israel, because he did. He warned them against that. He said that was coming. They did, so change your ways, gave them a chance. If any of you have children or grandchildren or friends and so on, have young children, and you know what it's like when you warn your kids that if they do something that you know will be bad for them, they're going to be regretting that. Whether you have to apply the punishment or it's a natural punishment. Exiles. The nation of Israel was not once but twice major exiles out of the land. Taken away from the land. And then there were divisions that went on in the community when they were in the land. They were fighting with each other. We never do that, do we? So I see a lot of suffering in the Hebrew text. A lot of suffering. Yet they stayed together somehow as a community of Jewish people to this day. Although sometimes it's hard to know that. I mean, you meet some Jewish people today and I wonder, there are more Jewish people in other faiths, it seems like. Sometimes I just don't know how they could do that. But they are. I don't want to get lost in that, but they are. Yeshua warned that following him would bring suffering. And if you really took that to heart and you still put your faith in him, maybe you want to scratch your head and say, I'm not sure, I should have thought that through. Think of all the things you could have been doing other than sitting here on Saturday morning, Shabbat morning, and listening to somebody like me talk about the Bible and about issues connected with your faith. It's a beautiful day outside. Look at that day. You see how blue that sky is? It is just gorgeous out there. And here you are in here. Because why? You're asking yourself that same question. No, I hope you'll find that it'll be a worthwhile expenditure of your time. This text, where's John? John's not here. The Moragas are probably with their children somewhere, watching over them. I don't know if he's able to listen and hear me right now. John must have, you would think I would have known that he was going to share this not once but 3 times in his Torah message this morning. But it fits here as well. Luke 9:23, and Yeshua was saying to them all, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. He warned you, Yeshua did, that what you are about to embrace, if you embrace him, is not going to be an easy life. Daily, you must die to self and put God ahead of your own self, your own desires. Did you get out of bed this morning? Anybody here get out of bed saying, what would I like to do and what would God like me to do today? I mean, a lot of us don't even bother thinking about that. We're too, we know what we're going to do today. We have it planned out. We're coming to Shabbat service. That's a good thing. But after that, you know what? We're going to go to Neiman Markup and we're going to try to find some things. We're going to do some shopping. We're going to go down to visit somebody. We're going to go out to lunch and dinner, watch a movie. I'm looking forward to all that, right? Oh. You have to deny yourself if you really want to serve him. Matthew 5 tells you the famous sermon on the Mount. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. You see, you can be persecuted and insulted for doing a lot of things. If you watch The Way I Drive, for example, no, it's not that bad. Quiet in the back, please. Yeah, if there are things where you are legitimately to blame for negative reactions, that's not what Yeshua is talking about. If you are persecuted because of things you do for him when you're serving him, blessed are you. That's when you're doing something that's really good. Rejoice when those persecutions come against you, and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you, because they were doing what God called them to do. And you just asked Jeremiah if he would do that again. He didn't want to do that. Jonah, another one. Just, his whole, you have to feel for Jonah. Really, the guy knew what was coming. He said, I don't want to go to Nineveh. There's a bunch of people that, number one, they hate you and they hate me. And even if they do, and they turn around, I bet you're going to bless them. I know what kind of God you are. I don't want them to be blessed. I'm not going to tell them anything. Oh, really? We'll see about that. Yes, serving God brings suffering. Peter, old foot in the mouth Peter, he finally got it. Not right away. He was a little slow. As a fisherman, maybe he had understood how to fish work, but he didn't understand how this walking behind a rabbi works. Peter finally got it, and he wrote about it, about the unavoidability of suffering in order to serve God. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 20 to 21, he wrote this: For what credit is there if, when you sin and are harshly treated, you endure it with patience? What credit is there if you mess up, do something that's not right, you know it's not right, and yet you do it anyway, and then you get persecuted for that? You're not going to get credit from God for that. Doing things that are wrong and getting treated harshly for that, like maybe being put in jail or fined or being given a ticket, have to show up in court. Anybody speeder here? Breaking the law? You don't get credit for that. But if, when you do what is right and you suffer for that, and you patiently endure that, this finds favor with God. That's a real encouragement. For you have been, and this is I don't know if you've read this lately. For you know what? You have been called for this purpose, to do good and suffer for it. You see, since Messiah also suffered for you, leaving an example for you to follow in his steps. You think you're going to suffer for your faith? You will. If you how many people here can think of a time that they suffered for something they did for the Lord? Can you think of any situation that you've been in where you have personally felt that you know you were doing what's right, what God wanted you to do, but it wasn't well received? Yeah. I got my hands up here. I think it's happened. I can join you with that. How did you feel when that happened to you? Oh, I think I'll never do that again. Or did you smile in your heart and say, you know, I only care about what he thinks, not about what these others think. Yeah. Listen, I've gone through some tough times. You wouldn't know that, but it has. I won't take the time this morning. But we shouldn't be surprised when it happens to us, and that's the point. If you're serving the Lord, don't be surprised if that happens to you. You see, I put it in the vernacular. No good deed goes unpunished. You've heard that, right? When you do things for the Lord, you may well get punished for that. That's okay. I want to share some other up-to-date information, more up-to-date examples of how this has worked out. It caught my eye. There are a huge number of such examples in life today that I could pick. You may be familiar with them. How about this one? In November 6, 2015, the Little Sisters of the Poor, who have a home that they minister to the poor and aged in this world, the Little Sisters of the Poor went to court against somebody called Burwell, who was the prosecuting attorney at that prosecuting side. They were taken to court. Can you imagine taking the Little Sisters of the Poor to court? I mean, that you're going to lose that just because of who you're taking to court. I think that was just dumb. But they did anyway. You're going to take this group to court? I think that was not a wise thing. The sisters, you see, why were they taken to court? The sisters were resisting, at the time, the Obama administration's ACA, the Affordable Care Act, and had a mandate in there that employers must cover contraception. Any of the FDA-approved 20-some-odd contraceptive methods, some of which were actually, after pregnancy, abortion-inducing drugs for all employees. You're going to make this church group pay for that. Well, the law's the law. Became the law of the land, thanks to John Roberts, but we won't get into that. So they were taken to court because they didn't want to. They said, you know what, we don't believe in aborting children and paying so that people can do that. It's bad enough others do that. We can't stop them. But don't make us support that. Gee whiz. That's over the top. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. SCOTUS, as it's known. And on May 6th, after about a 2-year time frame, on May 16th, 2016, SCOTUS decided in are you ready for this? An 8-0 decision in their favor, kind of it seemed, that the lower court, they said, you know what, we are not going to tell you how to fix this, but we're sending it back to this lower court, and they must figure out an accommodation that will allow the sisters not to have to pay for contraceptives because it would violate their religious beliefs. A decision which seemed at the time to be a tremendous victory for the sisters. Basically, they didn't overturn the decision. They said, you know what? You guys need to find an accommodation for them. And we're too busy to figure it out ourselves, so we're going to make you guys do that. Now, if you're a lawyer here, you understand how this works. So, that's what happened. Until November 21st, 2017, just recently. Guess what happened? The Little Sisters of the Poor had to go back to court. You thought it was over, didn't you? Here they go. They're not done. They know where the court is now. Now they must defend themselves against 2 lawsuits that were presented from two different states. Brought lawsuits against them. Are you ready? I don't know if you're ready for this. 2 different states. Now, I want you to, without shouting it out, I want you to just think in your mind, what 2 states do you think might have brought lawsuits against them? I hear some mumblings. I've heard. Okay. Here we go. Pennsylvania and California. Yes, our state. They represented you and me, if you live here. The attorneys, the Attorney General for Pennsylvania, a guy named Josh Shapiro. Oops. And the other one for California, Xavier Becerra. You've heard of him? He used to be in the Congress. He's now an AG for California. They filed lawsuits to take away the sisters' recently won religious exemptions from the Affordable Care Act contraception mandate. They said, okay, we have reasons why that was illegal. I want to read a text from somebody named Melanie Israel, who happens to be a research assistant for the Conservative Heritage Foundation. This is what she said about the case. She says, you don't have to share the sisters' beliefs to recognize the government should not be able to force Americans to set aside their conscience when they want to serve the poor, heal the sick, or educate the next generation. You know, I think anybody who brought that lawsuit was not wisely advised. I mean, you have to smile a little bit at that, in a way, because really, you're going to take them to court a second time? You didn't learn your lesson. This hasn't been decided yet. So keep the lawsuit in prayer. We'll see how it turns out. I think they're going to lose. California and Pennsylvania. I have to tease my daughter about that because she lives in Pennsylvania. How could you let that happen? And I know what she'll say. You live in California. You want to compare? On second thought, I might not say that to her. You see, I want to share one more case with you. Not a legal case, but just this week there was a student at a place called the well-known, maybe not so well-known college. Just this week, a student at the Georgia Gwinnett College. I don't know how many of you heard this. If you're familiar with this case, you're listening to the news too much. Just this week, a student at Georgia Gwinnett College wanted to share his faith in Yeshua at his school. Now, there is this thing called the Second Amendment. Huh? First, I'm sorry. Second, that's the gun law. First, there's this thing called the First Amendment. You're allowed freedom of speech. There are actually more amendments than that. But he was prohibited from doing so. He was prohibited from doing so outside the campus library where he was trying to stalk, because it wasn't known as and marked as a free speech zone. I thought the United States was a free speech zone. But if you're on this campus here, so the next time that he spoke, he went to a free speech zone that had and he had with him a free speech permit in hand that had been signed and approved that he could speak right there. Now, you won't believe what happened. When I read it, it was like, I mean, you can't make these things up. The campus police silenced his speech because they deemed the information that he shared as disorderly conduct. Because why? It disturbed the comfort of the listeners. Oh, those poor snowflakes. I'm smiling. It's hard not to smile at some of this. It's absurd. It's so beyond the pale. But, the bad news is this. This is going on everywhere. This happened to be in Georgia. I thought, Georgia, the Bible Belt, part of that, deep south there. I thought, this is Georgia. Disturbed the comfort of the listeners to share the gospel, his faith in Yeshua. He made them feel, exactly. Pam said it right. You can just walk away, You don't have to listen. It's not a... In other words, this public, taxpayer-funded college simply didn't like the student's speech, so they silenced it. We don't have to go very far from our area where we live here to look around to find colleges that are just like this, many of them. We all know about what happened at Berkeley, the attempt to bring a conservative speaker in there. And the Berkeley thing really fascinated me because we all saw the videos of the things that happened, some of these people dressed up in black outfits who were throwing, bicycle stands, trying to throw them through the windows of the libraries and so on. And the police who were there, they're watching. They stood by. They didn't do anything. They didn't stop them. I thought, it reminds me of this Parkdale. No, just stood by. I think they were instructed and told to stand down. I don't think they had the opportunity to do what they would have done normally. But we see this, and the fact that they didn't, at the Berkeley situation, which is almost the trigger point in a way for a lot of these, not that it hadn't been boiling and at other universities all around this country about this, this free speech zone thing. The fact that the authorities did nothing to stop that, I think, encouraged more adverse behavior. What I'll call is unconstitutional behavior at so many places around the world, around our country, here in the United States. It's almost embarrassing. I'm personally scared. I don't know about you. Any of you have grandchildren? Yes. Okay. All of us who have grandchildren need to be praying because this country, those kids are going to grow up in a different world than you and I grew up in. And it's not going to be a better one. You do indeed suffer for your faith in this country right now. Not to mention countries elsewhere where people are beheaded for their faith. We know about those too. So when I look at these allegations here, claims that they don't believe, the Jewish pre-believers don't believe the world is hopelessly evil, that's wrong. Celibacy is necessary. No, it's not. They don't believe that you must suffer for your faith. Yes, you will. You will suffer for your faith. All three of these are wrong. And I think the central truth is indeed correct. Because the world is hopelessly evil, you and me, godly people who care about the Lord, who care about what He wants us to do and what He wants us not to do, that others are doing. If you try to get involved in that, you will suffer for your faith. May God encourage you to do what is right in spite of that. Don't let that stop you from doing what is right. Rejoice and be glad when you are persecuted, for great is your reward in heaven. God will not forget you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're in nobody knows better than you the world that we live in, how difficult it is. But Lord God, we ask for your strength and your courage and your protection, your wisdom, your boldness, that we might be effective witnesses for you in our lives, in what we choose to do. Give us wisdom about the things that we choose and the things that we don't. May others see what we do and be encouraged to follow you as well. Lord God, I thank you that there is a community of people sitting right here and maybe listening. If they listen to this over the web or whatever, Lord God, there are people who really do want to serve you. And yet some of them are intimidated and not wishing to suffer or experience pushback for doing what is right. But I pray, Lord, you would encourage each one of us to keep our eyes on you and not on the world. The world is fading away, but you are forever. And so, Lord, thank you for this time, and I pray, Lord, it would be a blessing and encouragement to each and every one of us. In Yeshua's precious name, amen.